In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hey, I'm Jared.
And I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha.
Welcome.
So, I understand today you wanted to talk about...
Yeah, I came across a cool factoid here last week, and I really wanted to tie it into, a little bit of the supernatural about where we're from and have a little bit of fun with it. So today we're talking about America. It's a broad topic because it's not just one thing. America as a country, as a continent, as a Western ideal, as a history, and just sort of, it's a big word that's really loaded and comes from a lot of places. We're both Americans, so we're vested. Let's put that out there. We obviously think plenty good things about ourselves as well as the negatives out there.
Sure.
The thing that had come across, I've got this thing in general about name meanings. Without throwing my children under the bus, my child's name is a non-standard name, but means Circle of God. And if you were to go through, almost everybody's name comes from a word which means something else. Gregory is calm and happy, is it not?
I don't actually know. I don't pay much attention to such things.
Michael means of God,
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So many of our words come from word meanings. So looking up America, I just had the thought, what's America mean? What's the name meaning of America? So I came to find out that in good detail that America was first discovered by Amerigo Vespucci, the Italian explorer who set forth the then revolutionary concept that the lands that Christopher Columbus sailed in 1482 were part of a separate continent. A map created in 1507 by Martin Waldseemüller was the first to depict the new continent with the name America, with a Latinized version Amerigo.
So,
yeah.
Interestingly enough, Christopher Columbus didn't actually discover the mainland of America. That, as I understand it, was Amerigo Vespucci who found the mainland. Columbus found various islands off the coast, but he never actually wound up in the mainland of America.
I understood that as well, and I believe that he did some time down in South America as well. It was really profitable, extremely profitable for people to do that at the time. So if you do dig in the next layer down, what would be the name meaning of America? What is the name meaning of our country?
I don't know. Tell me.
So if you go just to any old name defining site, I have one here with Italian roots. It's a boy's name, which means America, of course, and home ruler. Stemming from the Germanic name Almaric, Amerigo is a combination of the words work and rule or power. So the rules or powers of work is kind of how I took that. I tried to have a discussion with you offline about this, about how people look at the word logos, and logos is a charged word. It can be little L logos, big L logos, and there's sort of a lot of meaning packed into that word. If you were to think of a word like that in logos meaning something intrinsically, America intrinsically means something like merit through work or merit of work, or is that coming through?
Yeah, I'm understanding. It's interesting.
So we live in the merit of work.
Well, and when you take that to a sort of a global scale, we are the country that has sort of defined what it means to work hard for a very long time and to be, what would you call it, uncorrupt, not corrupt. There are a lot of there is an Asian work ethic, but a lot of the countries in Asia are also incredibly corrupt, where up until recently, America had not been particularly corrupt. It was sort of, we valued honesty and truth, and corruption was actually frowned on by the culture, which is what makes it.
Well, and I wouldn't just leave it at that. I would back that up. I would say that you could look at the history of America. Um, oh, we should find the article and post it along with this post when we put it up.
Sure.
But there have been plenty of articles that explain the reasons and how you might look at what people say being a vector to what they find important. Does that make sense? So even though you may not hold to something, and therefore you're lying about saying something is the way it is, if you hold that to be important and good, right? I kind of go back to.
So you're talking about essentially hypocrisy here, where hypocrisy is saying one thing and doing another thing, when the reality is nobody lives up to the ideals that they hold. Instead, we just do our best. When you actually believe something and try to live it, that actually has meaning. But it also means something what you're doing instead of what you say.
Also that, but what I'm pointing at as a historical reference point for people to be able to prove that people felt this way and thought this way,
Mm-hmm.
in the America history, you can look at what were advertising campaigns. What did people say that they thought people wanted to hear? And that's pretty obvious. If you are
Sure.
trying to win a political battle, if you're trying to, oh gosh, sell a product, if you're trying to,
Whatever it is you're trying to convince people to do, yeah.
Indeed. You can look at the things that they say about their candidate or whatnot as things that the people thought were good things at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right.
So what were some of the most famous early American myths? That George Washington never told a lie, that he prayed fervently, right? That he was a great military leader. These things that just weren't true. I mean, I can't actually speak to how fervently he prayed. I'm not going there.
Well,
He
and
was not a great military leader. He was not. Obviously, he was human, so he, of course, was not a never liar.
sure. Now, I know there are examples of things he did as a military leader that were exemplary, but I know there are some that
Like
were
what?
not so. Well, um, oh, just for example, I know it was kind of out of desperation, but the whole crossing the Delaware River to take the one fort, that was actually kind of an impressive thing. And then I remember reading a story one time about military discipline and how, in order to enforce discipline, he did not put that off on someone else. He actually carried it out himself. He had the fortitude to actually do what had to be done to maintain discipline, even when it came to executing people.
Historically, I would say that the things that he is most notable for is winning 2 of 7, or a less than 50% win rate of
Sure.
battles.
Yeah.
And at the end of the war, he handed over the reins of power to the people. He
Well, and
was not going to be a military dictator.
that I would say is the most amazing thing he did by far, was not trying to hang on to power. That's incredibly
He
unusual for sure.
he fought of the people for the people and gave it back to the people. That was what was
Right.
unusual.
Right. That's absolutely true. As far as being a great military leader, probably not. When you're comparing him to other people, no, I don't think so. But on the other hand, you have to realize that the forces he was using to fight his battles weren't exactly the top of the line forces either. They were fighting against the then world superpower Britain, which was like that they had a professional army and they were the cream of the crop. And he was using this sort of ragtag group of colonials to try to oppose them. So is it terribly surprising that he wasn't, successful in more battles? Not terribly.
Not terribly. Not terribly. He just had a huge support. We had the heart behind us for sure, not the technology.
Sure. Well, and there's the whole thing that people keep discovering in Afghanistan, which is when the natives are not on your side, there isn't a whole heck of a lot you can do past a certain point unless you're actually willing to either kill them all or totally disrupt and break up their society.
And it's quite something. Just in the history factoids that are out there, if you look at the first people to have arrived in North America, they were what would have been Vikings. They stayed for less than a decade, complaining about the natives, which they called Skrulings, which are nasty people.
Interesting.
Yep, they came. They could have stayed. They said, "We don't like these people," and they left.
You know, well, and then there's the fact that we don't actually know who the people who lived in America 2,000 years ago were. The Native Americans, well, okay, so there are Native Americans as we think of them today, and these are tribes of hunter-gatherers, but there was another group of people who lived in the US before that who were great builders of amazing cities and such. And we still see things like the Serpent Mound, or if you look at aerial
Is the
photographs
Serpent Mound the one that's up in North America, up in the Canada
no
American border?
no it's in Ohio, I think.
I see. The one that's up there, that's on the border, it's touching the ocean, near the Canada-America border, was Vikings of the modern era.
Right. I know that. What I'm talking about is the people who lived in America before what we call Native Americans. They built amazing, crazy things, and then they kind of died off, and they were replaced by the Native Americans. And when you go and you talk to the people who... Well, when you look at the historical records of the people who talked to Native Americans and asked, "How did you build this stuff?" They're like, "Well, we didn't do that. That was there when we got here. We don't know what."
Praying to it for years,
right? Well, and it was here when we got there. We don't know how that happened. So we don't actually know who those Vikings might have encountered when they landed. For all we know, it could have been a race of people who were actual giants, because there are actual giant bones scattered across America in burial sites. And
sure, the red-headed giants are certainly visible here, but they didn't say anything about a description other than that they were nasty, not large. They were nasty.
Right, I get that, but in the Vikings case, it could have been that they said they were nasty, and it's because they were crazy, giant,
cannibalistic.
Exactly, it could have. We don't know. Now that's all conjecture, but the point is. The point is that the accepted history of this continent really isn't what it actually was, because they're working off of facts that are not appropriate.
Well, they've got some carbon dating, genetic testing, proof of the fact that it was essentially the same people we call the Vikings that were over there.
Oh yeah. And I don't doubt that they landed and that exactly what you said happened. I'm just saying that when it comes to the history of what happened in mainland America, either north or south, we don't have any particular written records. And except in very specific places where there are some megalithic ruins and, where the Aztecs were, where the Inca were, where the Mayans were, we really don't have a lot except for that sort of thing. And then a lot of the people who are historians like to ignore some of what the native peoples actually say happened. So yeah, curious stuff.
Yeah, but that I would point anybody for a large swath of more information that you'll have to pick through than you'll possibly get through in a lifetime is the Graham Hancock body of work.
Of course,
there's plenty there that you can find a line to go down.
Sure. Now, and with Graham Hancock, you sort of have to put out the caveat / warning. He too has his agenda as far as what he thinks is going on, and you have to be aware of it, because there are some places where he's obviously wrong and just isn't willing to deal with reality, like anything to do with the Great Flood.
Assigning anything from the Great Flood to a biblical narrative he has trouble with, I believe.
Well, the idea that there was a worldwide flood that covered the whole earth is something he isn't willing to contemplate, as far as I knew.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be like the Turing test with AI. They just keep moving the goalpost as to what it takes to count as human or count as alive or count as passing the Turing test. What counts as the whole world being flooded? Okay, there were their peaks at some point. Was the entire known world where people were because people didn't go on top of frozen mountains to survive at the time, right? All of the
Well,
you could imagine all of the Tibetan temples going up in response to a flood and not having been there before.
well, sure. I understand what you're saying. I know what the Bible says. It says that all the peaks in the world were covered by the waters, which to me is pretty. Uh, it's pretty definitive. It's what it says, and I tend to believe the Bible. I tend to default to taking it as true rather than believing what human beings have decided is more likely.
I'm of the opinion that I would have a difficulty getting to such a fine point of verbiage out of an old language that didn't have the depth of nuance that the English language does. Most languages just don't. I would not be able to guarantee that no matter what I put on paper, that humans 4,000 years later, 10, 13, 20,000 years later, however long it may be, 2 years later after I'm dead, I couldn't be guarantee that they wouldn't change it from all the world to all the peeps.
Well, and what I would say is that in this case, you're counting God out of the equation. The question is whether God preserves the meaning of his word as it's translated you know, um, in substantial content. And I think he does. So, and we could talk about that. That's a whole other subject. But anyway, we wanted to talk about America here. So,
And it's supernatural progression, right? Because starting off, we've got um, sort of the precursor to America, all of the religious work happening throughout would you call it the United Kingdom? Is all of Italy, Spain, Europe?
no, UK is just Britain.
I see, I see.
You could say
Pardon my,
Europe.
all of Europe. So, so as the religious impulse was kind of working its way, and not just being in Europe, but sitting in Europe and fermenting and becoming its own loaf of bread, right? Becoming its own brand and version and guidance for what was appropriate for their area. They did kind of swath over and name all of the lands, name all of the animals, if you will. Um, and so we have separate from the founders, separate from the senders, which would be the kings and queens, right? Because they're funding everything. You've got incentive structures being set up throughout the world that push towards something that creates an America as it stands with leadership as it stood, which created a constitution as it was, right? So it's all seems like these were the people that were happened to be, but never before and never since has it been. So the supernatural flow of it is really amazing to me.
So just to sort of re-encapsulate that to make sure people understand what you're getting at, let me try to say it back to you. What you're saying is that never since then and never before was there a group of people, as there was in Europe, in the nations of Europe, who set up a system of incentives that pushed people out into the unknown to explore things that otherwise wouldn't have been explored, and to take them and to colonize them and to create civilization in other places in the world.
I don't even believe that they were set up at the time. I believe incentive structures were such that they were um, um, they'd filled up. What's it called whenever you've got as much salt as you can put into the water? Emulsified?
No, saturated.
Saturated,
Yes.
saturated. So they'd saturated their location with the ideals that they held. They didn't
Right.
understand how to go up or down or anywhere else. They were looking for what we call clout today. They were looking for notoriety. They were looking for something else to put their name on.
Yeah.
And so simultaneously their wickedness was pushing them with a positive light to stamp a positive light on a future that they couldn't join.
Got
They
it.
were they were
Yep.
unintentionally assigned a Moses task. He was not able to get to the promised land.
Right, I gotcha.
So they yeah
So
they were
yeah, they were given a task that they would
to
never
reach
see the completion of, but that in carrying through, they created America, which the ideals of and the all of the things about it were sort of extraordinary in world history. Agreed,
right.
100%.
Right. So they did it based on the things they held high, even if they weren't reaching them themselves, so that their children could be on that
On
higher
their
plateau.
ideals, yeah, based
Yeah,
on their
ideal.
ideals, which is the way to put it, right? It's like ideals are the things that we believe are good and worth looking up to, but that we don't necessarily expect to reach ourselves. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. I well, and in case anybody who's listening to this hadn't figured it out, I have and Greg has a very positive uh, view of the ideals and the culture that birthed America, the things that made Western civilization great, and it was great, and it has been great, are noteworthy and important. And there's a huge swath of our society today trying to tear those things down, and I'm not down with that. I'm not for that.
Well, and there are people that would maybe go the route that would say that you are a privileged being, right? You came from education and wealth and whatnot from this other place, and you came into the place where another place where they were not as technologically advanced, they were not as educated, they didn't know as much, whatever. And then you used your guns and your opinions to wipe out those people. That's not possible. It's just not. That is a non-factual, impossible assumption that happened. Those people came and fought tooth and nail and butt heads with nature for 200 years to eke out a place for their children to grow. It wasn't as if they may not have survived without their additional fortification before leaving their walled their gilded nest, but there's no denying that the ideals being followed in a butt-headed way for longer than one person being alive is what caused it to succeed, not just
Sure.
the fact that they came from wealth.
Well, and the other thing you have to that you have to take out here is, I guess I would say, this sort of brings to my mind a conversation on Twitter the other day that I was watching. There's a guy I'm following who was sort of butting heads with another person, talking about how the Europeans were nasty and horrible and did this and that, um and he's like, yeah, well, the Aztecs. Okay, it was a comparison of the Spanish Inquisition to the what the Aztecs did in the name of their religion. And he's like, you can say the Spanish Inquisition was horrible, but over the course of like 150 years, they killed a few thousand people. It wasn't that bad. It was messed up for sure. There were bad things about it, but when it comes down to comparing it to many other things, it wasn't that bad. When you look at how many people, how many human sacrifices the Aztecs were committing every year, it at the high end, it may have been as many people as the Spanish Inquisition killed in its entire history over 150 years. Now that's at the high end, but the point is still valid that the number of people who a lot of these groups in America were actually killing, it was a non-trivial number of their own people that they were murdering and sacrificing every year. It's pretty horrible, barbaric, bloody stuff. And so when you try to put moral values onto these things, you have to decide, are you actually going to judge everybody? And if so, then you have to judge them all by the same standard. And if you're not, then butt the heck out and stop judging.
I think I'm a little bit more superstitious and religious about this particular topic. I think that murder happens, death happens. There's no good or evil to that. God does not care about death. You are raisable. Death, this isn't important.
Well, okay,
The problem is,
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that God does care, but that death does not rise to the level that most people assign to it. How's that?
fair enough. The greater issue
Yeah.
is if you really look at Aztec societies, they had a caste system where those people that had their sacrificial lambs, as they were, didn't come from the wealthy. They came from the lower castes.
Right.
And every time you end up with a caste system, God says no, right? He's going to take your lowest level, pair them with someone from somewhere else, and they're going to overthrow you. Because God says that caste systems are not what I want. I want to be able to move someone from anywhere I want to anywhere I want.
I don't know. India's had a caste system for a very, very long time. So, well,
and they were taken over by every single white man. One white guy walks into a whole country and says, "Hey, poor people, you want to overthrow the assholes over there?" And then,
I mean, I can't argue with that. That kind of has happened, hasn't it?
So again, God does not like your caste system. Give everybody a chance, at least on the face of it. Otherwise, they will overthrow you.
Well, there's some truth in that. That's interesting.
So more so than how Aztecs were treating one or the other, it's that when smallpox hit them and when the Spanish Inquisition hit them, etc., they did not have cooperation. They had tyranny.
Right. That's absolutely true. And that is a big reason why their system was so brittle, so easy to overtake. Interesting. So you want to...
Can we take just a quick second? I'd love to fill up my coffee, and then I have one other thing about this that I'd love to just spend a few minutes on.
Absolutely. That's what I was about to say. We'll be back in a minute.
A second. Coffee time. I'd like to take a moment to thank all the people enjoying Modern Apocrypha. As many of you can see, I'm an avid coffee drinker, and I've been drinking North Arrow coffee for a couple of pounds now. You can find North Arrow coffee at northarrowcoffee.co, all one word, where they list coffee of the month and how green coffee is handled. I've been enjoying some of the number 4 Honduras and some of the number 10 Peru, available at northarrow.co. If you'd like to help support us even more, you can use discount code E6 for 10% off your coffee order today. Thank you.
Modern Apocrypha is brought to you by Brightstar, the forthcoming book by me, Jared Michaud, due to hit shelves April of 2024. For pre-release copies, head over to e6universe.com. Use the promo code Israel for 10% off with your order. And we're back.
Welcome back, everyone.
So, you wanted to talk about ideals.
I wanted to talk about the American ideal. What is it? We started this episode talking a little bit about how political advertisement might give us an idea or a window into what people thought were ideals of the time. And you might follow that through up until the creation of the New York Times, when propaganda more likely came in to try to wag the dog, to try to push the people around, as opposed to try to give the people what they were looking for.
No, actually, if you look into the history of journalism and media in the U.S., it was a lot more, what would you say? Back in the early days of the U.S., newspapers were sort of aligned with one side or the other openly, politically. So there was no such thing as objectivity in journalism then. And frankly, I think objectivity in journalism is a lie anyway. But the point is, back then, they didn't hold any such standards. So they would just espouse whatever views they held, and they'd just put them out there. They'd just say, this is the way it should be. And of course, it's because we think so. It's like Thomas Paine's Common Sense. The polemics that these guys put out were not they were not shy about saying what they thought.
They were very virulently violent verbally to each other about their sexual habits, about their partners, about their inability to
Their
stay.
parentage, about anything you can think of. That they were.
And yeah, anything that you could possibly say that was to bring down someone's character was certainly said.
Well, and actually, that's a really interesting contrast because at the time, these people had character that led them to uphold the institutions that they had created above their own political agendas. Where today, we're back to the point where we're saying nasty things about each other, but people don't uphold those political institutions. They don't value those highly anymore.
Sure. That is certainly something that I think that the people at the very very most elite are in such a bubble that they don't even get to hear the case. They don't have a naysayer near them that gives them all the sides.
Well, I don't know. There's a lot that goes into that. We could talk about that for a while, but the whole question of the dialectic, the enemy influencing various subcultures in the country to push that subculture into the position to do what the enemy wants it to do. It's like a lot of people I know 20 years ago were talking about how journalists had to be just absolutely nasty people to be willing to publish the lies they were publishing. And I'm like, that's when I was in the journalism world, was back about 20 years ago. And at the time, I'm telling people, no, that's not what's going on. These people they just have their heads that far up their butts to where they don't even know what's true. They don't even see it. So, and I think that's kind of what you're saying about the political elites, is that their subculture is so insular and so twisted that they don't actually understand what's really going on. And I think there's truth in that, but I also think that they don't care. So,
well, sure. Well, and I think that does tie into some of the things that we said were good things at the founding.
yeah,
Some of the ideals that I remember, without looking anything up and just kind of remembering the good things of America.
yeah,
We don't lie. George Washington never told
truth,
a lie.
telling the truth.
We spoke frequently with the common man. We took to heart what the common man said as not just a stupid opinion, but another reality, another real thing to take into our psyche.
Sure.
George,
And along those same lines, respecting other people's right to say what they're going to say, even if you hate what they're saying, was actually an ideal that people did live up to. And it's one that a certain portion of the American people still try to live up to and try to hold as important in a real way, and everybody gives lip service to, or did, or something.
And I think that this one might also lie in parallel to the parable of washing feet, where the higher up on the totem pole of power you are, the lower the level of people you're serving, your customer, your master of what directs you for where your next step will go, would be not on your level. You don't exist to further your goals. You exist to.
That's certainly true. Yeah, the idea that the people who you're supposed to be, whose part you're supposed to be taking, are the least among us.
Mm-hmm. And that is certainly something that I believe was trying to be said through that line about interacting with and taking to heart what the common man would say and seeking it out. Right, when you're at a party and you stop along the road in Plymouth town and talk to the common man, who you can tell his shoes aren't as nice, and ask him how his day was and what his difficulties are, so that you can understand what all the difficulties might be. It certainly lends itself to a broader understanding of your second order effects of the actions that you take. If I close off this river, if I tear down this fence, what happens?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
It also completely reinforces the fact that nobody is source matter expert for every perspective. You can only be a source matter expert for those things that you have experience in.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Well, and I guess the other thing is trying to be a source matter expert for the things that you actually care about used to be important to people who had power in our society. Not so much
Yeah,
now. Now it's having the power that's important, but it used to be important to those people to actually understand what was going on and try to be doing something useful about it.
the difference between what do you think and don't you think?
Okay.
Wouldn't you say? We hear it a lot. Don't wouldn't you say? Don't you think? Well, no. Don't put words in my mouth. How about you just say, what do you think?
Yep. No argument.
Are there any other real big ones from the sort of the Washington story founding ideals that were?
Oh, the idea of God was a big deal back then. Um, People really did, whether it was lip service or not. You can argue about it, but our founders, most of them, really were Christian men in some real sense. You had your deists, and people like to pull out the whole, oh, what about the Jefferson Bible? What about, these people really weren't that Christian? They did this and they did that. And I'm like, you know what? That's crap, man. These
Yeah,
people
what were their
actually did
ideals?
hold they really did hold God as being important, and the whole Jefferson Bible thing was an exception, not a rule, and you trying to make a rule out of it doesn't work. The point is, the people at the time really did see God as the creator of the universe, as being the one they answered to. It's like, um, the whole "give me liberty and or give me death" thing. You've heard that quote, right?
Many times.
Okay, do you know the context of the quote? An appeal to arms and the God of hosts is all that is left us, but we shall not fight our battle alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations. Is life so precious or peace so sweet as to be bought at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. That's Patrick Henry.
Okay.
So that's just a little piece of his speech, but I memorized that when I was younger because I thought it was really inspiring, and it actually does sort of encapsulate some of the things they held as ideals. Freedom, liberty, real freedom to actually go do the things that you believe are important, and a society that respects people's right to do that and builds people's ability to do that was something they held as being very, very important.
Excuse me. It's something I heard recently from an older podcast. The Weinstein, that's the physicist. I always get them mixed up.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Eric.
Eric was going over the Declaration of Independence, and it begins with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident."
Yeah.
So, yes, freedom. Yes, freedom to move around once you've signed on to be a part of this project. And you don't get to do that no matter who you are, anywhere, everywhere. These are for Americans that have bought in to being American by following the Constitution.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? It says we hold these truths to be self-evident. If you don't, you're not included.
Well, and the other part of that is that their society really did hold those truths to be self-evident because their society was built on Christian ideals and Christian ideas. And the pinnacle of Christian ideas sort of comes to that point. So, you can't divorce that statement from the society in which it was uttered. And at the time, that was the society. And then as people came to America, they were expected to integrate themselves into the society. It isn't like the crazy mess we've got going on now. It was a case of, and this has been true up until just recently in American history, where people who came into the country were expected to actually change their worldview, their beliefs, and integrate into the society that they had come into America. And that was why we were so successful for so long.
Indeed, and certainly, I'm not speaking towards immigration law. I think that that's always going to be a moving target that is in the dialectic, and people are going to take advantage of. Something I would speak to in the people's mentality of the era would be the Salem witch trials. Right, they were not Christian, and yet it was punishable by death to be of witchcraft. Not that that was true, not that there were actual witches, but the idea of being a witch was deadly. Deadly.
Well, and maybe there were real witches, maybe there weren't real witches. I don't want to actually
Sure.
I don't want to go
Just
there,
as a
but
backup.
the point you're making is that the idea of witchcraft was held by the general society, whether they were Christian or not, to be a really bad thing and punishable by death. And that is actually true. It was. And that's just because it was a Christian society at the time.
And kind of with the intent that everybody joining would convert. And not that you would be a Protestant or Catholic or a particular vein of Christianity, but I don't know that they were looking for whatever. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know the religious name of Native Americans. I don't know what the name of their religion would be.
Well, whatever it is, but the point you're making is valid, that the people who founded this country expected that those who wanted to be a part of their society would take on their ideals. And that's a valid, that's a valid thing to expect in a society. And we've kind of lost that in the West. We sort of think we have to bend over backward and let everybody, decide what's important and think what they want, instead of going, these things are important. And if you want to be part of our group, you need to believe them.
In early American news sources and the documentation that you can find, was there any exaltation of great wealth where the rich people exalted for being wealthy?
As far as I know, all human societies have held people up who had more wealth than others. I think that what wealth they held was held differently. We had this many horses, or whatever it was measured differently. But I don't know of a human society where being wealthy hasn't been venerated to some degree.
I don't feel like it was venerated. I feel like in order to be seen on some level, you needed the wealth. But once you were seen, you needed to profess good morals. You needed
In
to.
early American society, you mean? And there, I actually don't think that's correct. The stories I have read that were actually written around that time, and we have novels today that were written around that time, sort of take for granted that people who were wealthy were going to be more highly regarded, but the push of society was to get them to profess good morals. It just took for granted that they would be more highly regarded, which, as I say, I think that's just a natural part of the human condition.
Interesting. And through the process, wealth would have been measured, I believe, in acres and products, whether that's tobacco or cattle or whatever.
Oh, for them, sure. You were saying Native Americans, and I'm like, well, yeah, they did too, but I didn't know why you were going there. But no, as far as the early Americans, yeah, that's definitely the case. And there was still gold. Gold was the currency back then, and the world lived on a gold standard starting not too long after that, when we had a real social fabric that made up most of the world. Gold was the base currency. So, and it sort of was heading in that direction at the time, even though I don't know whether you could say that the world was on a gold standard at the time, just because they didn't have the ability to have a solid network of the world.
It's interesting that we had so much more knowledge about the shape and the map of the world without very much of a connected social network.
You know, Yeah, there's so much that came from times that are past our memory where we still had knowledge. Like if you look, there are very very old maps that show the shape of lots of the continents that technically hadn't been explored in our memory now at the time, which shows that there was exploring that went on, that map making did go on, but we just don't remember how it happened or what happened. Some people point at Atlantis, some people point at pre-flood civilizations, some people point at this and that, and I don't have any idea.
Sure, sure. What other founding ideals would you throw out there here in our last few minutes of this podcast?
Um, well, I guess, are we talking in a historical context what they were, or are we talking what I find important about the ideals that I would try to bring forward and instill in my kids' generation? Which where are we going here?
Well, I suppose which ones are still most relevant would be the first place to go. Anytime that we've got something that's fallen completely off the wayside, I doubt we'd even find it. So if it's shining through the years till now, it's likely of some relevance.
Hmm. Well, for me, I always try. I always end up pointing this right back at Jesus, right? Because that's what matters. He sort of, his life and his ideals and um, his message were a big chunk of what formed Western society. They were sort of the base myth that all of this came from. And when I'm centered on that, I can point back to certain places in history, one of them being the founding of America, as a place when those ideals really came to full flower. And I don't, I've seen a lot of people lately who are denigrating the American founders because they were Freemasons and they were this and they were that and they were under the influence of the enemy here and there. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's the case. That's been the case all down through history. The rulers of this world, the principalities that are in charge of this world, are still the same beings that they were 2,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago. But the people who were alive at the time of the American founding did hold ideals, and their society was at a higher level in ideals, that it forced them all to a higher level of ideals than we have today. And if I could tell my kids, this is the sort of society that you would want to aim for, because the ideals that they held don't tell lies. Look to the people who are weaker than you and look to their well-being. And, you know, all of the things that go along with this don't oppress people. It's like the whole slavery issue. Well, yeah, a lot of the founders knew that that was an issue, and it was one that they couldn't tackle at the time because they had a different kettle of fish to fry. And so it wound up getting tackled 100 years later. And, well, not even 100, but it wound up getting tackled in the next generation or so. And yeah, it was a big deal. But guess what? A whole bunch of people died to get slavery out of our society. And Western society is the only society in the history of the world to actually get rid of slavery, as far as I know.
As far as I know, yeah. Um, and that would just be quite simply we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the ideal that they set forth in the founding documents, and it took almost 100 years for that to be actually put into practice when it came to slavery, but it was.
And despite every single newspaper and every politician ripping each other's hair out and talking about how terrible their daughters were and how beautiful they thought goats were, and how terrible they were to each other, all of them, every single man that signed the paper, every founder believed that we are all created in the eyes of our creator,
Well, they were willing to sign their name to it anyway. What was in their hearts isn't something that we can judge, but we can say they were willing to sign their name to the document that said it.
Well, yeah, I would say that they all believed it. It was literally a death sentence. They still staked their
State.
life on it.
Yeah, they did. It was their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And those are the sorts of ideals that that
Well, and these
we
were
as
some
human.
really nasty enemies. They were staking their bloodline and all of their children as well.
Oh, sure, sure. There were some. Yeah, the stakes were not low. And pointing back to those sorts of things, I think is very honorable. There are people who, despite their imperfections, are heroic and were heroes, and pointing back to them as examples of who we should be is a good thing.
Absolutely.
That seems like a pretty good place to put a pin in it.
That seems like a good spot to stop for now. I'll see everyone here on the next episode.
All right, we'll catch you later.
Thanks, everyone.